Hello and welcome to the Rob Burgess Show. I am of course your host, Rob Burgess. On this, our 293rd episode, our guest is Tom Lutz. Tom Lutz is the author of many books on literature and culture, as well as several books of travel writing and 2 novels. He is an American Book Award-winning cultural critic, University of California Riverside Distinguished Professor Emeritus, and the founder of the Los Angeles Review of Books. In addition to UC Riverside, he also taught at the University of Iowa, CalArts, University of Copenhagen, and Stanford. He now lives in the French countryside with his wife, the writer and critic Laurie Winer, and their 2 expatriate cats. His latest book, Chagos Archipelago, was published by Red Hen Press in October 2025 and is the follow-up to his novel Born Slippy, which was published by Repeater Books in 2020. And now on to the show.
How is France today?
A little on the gray side, I guess. A little wintry. Where are you?
Just outside of Indianapolis, Indiana.
Oh, okay. All right.
There's about a foot of snow on the ground right now. So.
Yeah. Yeah. No. I'm in the Southwest. It sprinkles some snow once in a while, but it never actually collects on the ground.
Okay. Cool. Yeah, I was in France briefly when I was in college. I student taught in England, and I had 2 weeks to go around Europe, and so I traveled by the EU rail all through there. I spent one night in Biarritz. Is that how you say it?
Yeah.
So yeah, I stayed at a hostel there. So that's my only experience with that part of France, but it was nice. So.
Yeah, I'm a couple hours inland from there, but I was in Biarritz for the first time just a couple weeks ago.
Oh, very nice. Cool.
Yeah.
Yeah, it seemed like a lovely area. So, but yeah, so well, I've been reading your book, and obviously I've read about your background, but for people that don't know, if you just go ahead and introduce yourself, that'd be great.
I'm Tom Lutz. I started off my writing life as a young wandering person trying to be Jack Kerouac, and that really didn't go anywhere because I thought that the idea was that you would just live a really interesting life, and it would somehow turn into novels. I didn't do much about the sitting down at a desk and actually doing it part. So, but that was the beginning of my writing life, and then eventually, without anything to show for it, I decided I was going to go to a university and learn how to learn literature and learn how to write. And that was in my late 20s. And once I got there, I realized there were these people called professors, and they read books for a living. So I stayed in and did an MA and a PhD in literature, and started off my writing life for in earnest as a scholar, writing scholarly works about American literature. And the whole time I thought I was a kind of novelist manqué, and I would one day kind of come out of my shell and become the novelist I was always meant to be. And that didn't happen for another 30 years or 35 years. But along that way, I wrote some travel books. I wrote some popular nonfiction. I wrote some more academic, a number of academic books, some journal articles and this kind of thing. But the novel took the longest. The first novel took the longest. And then once I started, I loved doing it so much that I wrote a second one right away, and I'm working on the third now.
That's great. Yeah, I'm glad you mentioned Jack Kerouac. It kind of reminds me of, well, actually, first of all, have you ever seen the original scroll that he wrote the On the Road on?
Yes. Yeah.
Yeah.
When it was touring the country a few years ago.
I saw that too. Yeah, it was at the Lilly Library at the Indiana University where I went, and it was just amazing to see it all laid out like that. But yeah, I think Kerouac and also one of my other favorite writers, Hunter S. Thompson, I feel like they inspired a lot of people to do really bad work, unfortunately, because people didn't see that part that you're talking about with the sitting down, the work. They're just like, these people just lived a crazy wild life, and they just left a great they left wonderful pages in a trail behind them somehow, so.
Yeah, yeah. And it's interesting because they're very different, right? The one thing they have in common is that they were both serious workaholics about the writing.
Exactly.
Kerouac was always he was doing this wild running around the country and with Cassidy and everybody else, and what he really wanted to do is go home to his mom's house and write some more.
Exactly.
And Hunter Thompson, I had a friend who ran into Hunter Thompson in the jungle in somewhere in South America. I forget the country, maybe Colombia. When he was when my friend was in the Peace Corps,
Hmm.
and Hunter Thompson came in to do a story and had a little typewriter that he carried in a case with him, and he said the thing that struck him was that the guy was just typing all day and all night.
Right.
So they had serious work ethics,
Definitely.
and unfortunately, Kerouac believed his own press and
Mm.
thought you didn't have to really you didn't have to really work. It was all spontaneous prose.
Right.
And the great thing about On the Road is that it wasn't spontaneous prose. He actually did edit it and make it much better.
Yes.
Uh, but a lot of the stuff is unedited and therefore unreadable.
Totally. Yeah. Well, you said it took you a long time to start writing novels. What was it that kind of was the stumbling block here? And it seems like it's been removed somewhat in the years since you started.
Yeah, I mean the one of the problem at the first, as I said, was I really just I had no sense of what a writer's life was because I was a young wandering guy working in restaurants and some laborer on construction sites and working on a farm in the Midwest and doing all sorts of things, but none of it was intellectual and none of it was around intellectuals or artists. And I just really had no sense of how to get going or how it would happen. And it was only when I started going to the university that I started getting a sense of how the world of writing and publishing and everything worked. And by that time, I realized that I also had a couple of kids. I had a few kids by the time I started my PhD. I needed to get serious about making a living and so I got the PhD so that I could get a teaching job. And I really could see that some of my professors had active writing lives, and they supported it by teaching courses on literature. And I thought this is a perfect life. But once I had spent the 8 years as doing my PhD work, writing the dissertation, working, teaching 4 classes a quarter the whole time, so that because I had the 3 kids. um, once I got done with those 8 years, I had kind of changed teams, and I was on Team Scholar, and I was writing my scholarly books, and I liked writing them. I enjoyed it. I love research, and so then every once in a while I would think, okay, it's time to try a little fiction. And when I did that, Henry James would sit on my shoulder and just kind of chuckle at my ineptitude. And it was really hard because I had read so much great literature at that point that there was no chance of me being a kind of primitive, naive artist. I was corrupted by my scholarly work, and I also had kind of forgotten how to write to average readers. I was writing to other graduate students and to professors in my field in a kind of somewhat jargonistic, very academic style, and I'd kind of been professionally deformed as a writer.
So you're saying your education and good taste held you back.
Yeah, I'm not sure it's good taste. It's really kind of the anxiety of influence. It's really the anxiety of the greats looking at you and
Right.
and scoffing. But I also, I was dedicated to what I was doing. I wrote a academic book just a few years ago, um, called Aimlessness, that was published by a university press, and I don't think although some people are responding to it that are not academics, but but I like that world. I like the world where you can assume that everybody has read writers A, B, C, D, E, F, G, and you don't have to explain who they are, and you can just mention them and mention one of their ideas and use it and move on. Um, then there's a real sense of liberty and freedom in that kind of writing for people who have done have done the work to get there. And it's great. It's great. And for a while, I just went back and forth between writing an academic book and then writing a book for the general audience and then writing an academic book and writing a book for a general audience. And so I really like both parts of it. But
Right,
nothing's as much fun as writing novels.
right. Well, I'm a journalist by trade, so it's always been hard for me. If I ever start trying to write fiction, it just feels so difficult because when I write about things, they're just there. You know what I mean? I'm just synthesizing reality basically, and I'm trying to do it the best way I can. But with fiction, it's like everything is just it's coming from you. It's the world building, I guess, that's a little bit intimidating to me. Did you find that to be a challenge at all?
No, no, because in a sense, when I'm starting a novel, I can talk about it now like as a general process because I've written two of them, it's and I'm in the middle of the third one. But when I'm writing a novel, I always start with a real person for every character. It's a person I've known, person that somebody that's real and a real situation. I'm not making up it's not like science fiction. I'm not making up whole worlds. I'm using the world we live in, and I'm using actual places, and places that I've been mostly. um, and so it's a little bit like a journalism in that it is a transcription. It is a kind of attempt to describe reality. And then I, of course, disguise the characters because I don't want to alienate the people they're based on or insult them, because a lot of my people do some really terrible things. A lot of my characters. So I describe, I do various things to disguise them, and then as I'm writing it, they morph. I read a lot of psychology for a while, and I'm very interested in the way your social interaction kind of constructs the ego, right? Um, which is the problem with narcissists is that they don't let other people help construct their boundaries of their ego,
Mm.
and the rest of us do. And so when my characters meet these other characters, or even so they start as a real person in my life that meets another real person in my life, but then they interact and they change each other. They become, and so the characters morph, and they morph fairly seriously into. And I also give them different backstories, and that backstory starts to work on me and on them, and so they become somebody that is entirely different than the original model. But along the way, I'm really describing, and by that time, they're very real to me. So it's not any different than writing about real people, except that you're not going to hurt anyone.
Right. How do you write dialogue and make it sound believable? Do you read it back to yourself out loud, or like what's your process? Because that's another thing I've struggled with if I've ever tried to write fiction. It's like I don't know how to put words in people's mouths that sound believable. I guess I don't know. How do you get over that?
I'm a pretty good mimic, as it turns out. Like I can imitate the people around me in ways that people say, "Oh my God, that you sound exactly like him," or her. And I don't know that that started young, and so I'm used to thinking through the way people speak and the way they talk. Although I also, when I was writing the travel books, the the I when I first started, I was taking notes about places and jotting various facts down and whatnot. And it turned out the only thing I ever really needed, the only thing that I couldn't remember well enough to write about, was the exact kind of syntax and cadence of somebody's speech. And so that when somebody is, I'm on the road and I want to write about somebody, I take as many notes as possible of the phrases that they're using and the way they speak. Elmore Leonard says, in his book about writing, says that you should never do kind of an orthographic representation of the way somebody speaks. You should never, you know, represent by changing the vowels, a southern accent or a western accent or anything else.
Hmm.
You should just use the right syntax and the right words, and it will sound like the accent.
Hmm.
Um, so I'm when I'm listening to somebody speak and I find them compelling and I know I want to write about them. Um, I do a lot of note taking. After I'm with them, I sit down immediately and start trying to remember everything they said as closely as possible. And I jot it all down. And
Yeah.
sometimes I go to the bathroom in the middle of a conversation and jot it down.
So I
Uh,
guess beware if you're talking to you, you might have somebody taking notes, I guess, right?
Rob, I'm afraid I'm going to turn you into a murderer in the next book.
Oh
I
gosh. Oh
today.
geez. Well, at least make it a little bit mysterious. Don't make it too obvious right away. Well, that's funny. Yeah, no, I think that's probably an effective method, kind of rip from the headlines, kind of thing, rip from real life. I think that does sound, and people say wild things if you listen to them. I've definitely found that, being a journalist, just if you just keep your ears open, people will just say the most off the wall things. And if you wrote that as a fiction character saying it, they'd be like, no, this is nobody would say that. It's like, yes, no, real people actually do sometimes talk that way. So. But
Yeah.
yeah. So, like, what do you? What is the idea? We can talk about your latest book if you'd like, but just in
Mhm.
general of novel writing, just because I'm interested in that as a topic. How do you? What do you get first in terms of a story? Is it the outline of the story? Is it a character? Is it a scene? What kind of comes to you first as a writer that makes you think this could be an entire novel?
The first one, it was a character. It's based on a kid that worked for me when I was building a house, and who then I stayed in touch with for many years later, many years afterwards. And I he was an amazing, strange storyteller, um, larger than life kind of figure, and I wanted to write a version of him. Um, he never killed anybody. But in real life. But so that whole novel just sprang from wanting to write about him. And the second one, um, I knew I wanted to do and the first novel is a very conventional novelistic structure. I wrote it first and third person, changed it to first person, changed it back to third person, changed it to first person, changed it to third person. I just
Wow.
kept, trying to make it work. But it's very conventional structure. And then this second one is based on Carl Hiaasen,
Hmm.
and Elmore Leonard does it sometimes too. And it's a and some other fiction writers use the same structure, which is you start off with a single character, um, and you tell a chapter that in which that character is it's a close third person perspective, but you're seeing the world from that character's eyes. And then the second chapter starts, and you're with a new character, and it seems to have nothing to do with the first character, but you get the story of that person. And then you get the third chapter, and it's a third character. And the fourth chapter is the fourth character. And then fifth chapter is the first character again. So, and then you start rolling through them all, and the narrative moves forward in a kind of fairly steady pace. Um, even though you're changing perspectives of who's telling. And I had a couple of rules for myself, and one was, you know, don't do any back at the ranch stuff. Meanwhile, back at the ranch, don't. So um, the kind of neat the time meter is staying very, very stable. I mean, characters can have a flashback or
Hmm.
but we when you pick up the first character again, four characters later, the same amount of time has passed as has passed in the three chapters in between.
Hmm.
And it's an interesting little trick to figure out how to have a coherent narrative that gets told that way. Um, so it's fun, but and then as it moves on, sometimes the chapters the sequence of the chapters goes faster and faster, and sometimes one of the characters dies,
Hmm.
and obviously they don't show up anymore. But so it changes as you go, but it's a very in a way very formalistic, very like a sonnet or something. They're very strict rules that I gave myself
Hmm.
that one. And so for that one, I had four characters. One of them is the same character from the first novel, so it's a sequel. But the other three are all new characters.
Hmm.
And and so I kind of worked out that those four would be the characters, and I had a little sense of that. I mean, I knew they were going to be in the Indian Ocean, which is where we left the, the character who's in chapters 4, 8, 12, etc. That character, I knew, I was going to pick him up a few years after the end of that earlier novel, and he would still be in the Indian Ocean. So, and I knew I wanted it to involve these paramilitary organizations. But then I kind of let the characters push the story where it needed to go based on who they were.
Do you map out in any way for yourself as you're writing the various storylines in a way that you can see it that helps you keep it all, or do you just have it all in your head? Like when you're going through the process, is there a big cork board with the yarn with the pens going from one place to another, or is it all kind of just up in your brain?
Yeah, most of it's in my brain. When I remember, as a literary scholar, I wrote a lot about classic American literature, and James and William Dean Howells and Fitzgerald and Hemingway and all the big names that we know. And I did a lot of Willa Cather and Edith Wharton and a lot of the Harlem Renaissance, and so I was kind of reading their fiction and sometimes their poetry, and in the case of Gertrude Stein. And when I was reading their work, but I was also reading biographies of them and criticism of them. So I got a lot of sense of writers at work and how they thought about their work. And one of the things that you can hear writers say a lot of the time is that the characters just kind of come alive and almost dictate to the writer what's going on. And it's not, and they feel like they give themselves over to the characters, and the characters take it from there. And I always thought, well, it might be true. But I wasn't convinced that it wasn't a kind of romanticization or exaggeration, or I wasn't completely sold on this idea. I didn't quite trust them all. But once I started doing it, I was regularly surprised by what my characters were doing in my in my head as I was typing the story. And one of them would say something to another one, and I would I would just crack. I would just laugh out loud as my fingers are flying on the keys. Just like, I can't believe she said that. That is so funny. And it didn't feel like I had. It was like me being funny. Really felt like she was being hilarious. And so I just that interesting alchemy. Means that once I realized that happens, and saw the results of that happening, which is that the result is that it does not, feel forced, and it doesn't feel like like uh, like there was a template that the writer was following. It feels like somehow it feels organic to these people, and it's partly because it is.
Hmm. That's really
Um,
funny. Yeah.
yeah,
Well, that's that's easy. If you get your characters to do your work for you, then you kind of take the hands off the wheel and just kind of let them drive, right? It sounds like.
yeah, yeah. I'll have to share my royalties with them.
Yeah, right, exactly. Um, but this, what do you want people to know about this book? I never know how much to say ahead of time with like a thriller type book, but what should people know about your latest book here?
Well, there are four characters. Like I said, well, there's actually five characters because the villain from the first novel comes back too. I mean, I don't worry about it too much because I know that people will forget so I'm not too much worried about the spoiler effect. Um, so there are the five main characters are a Spanish woman who's an assassin, a professional assassin, and she's 28 years old, but she feels like she's aging out of her profession and also getting a little bit bored with it, and kind of thinking about her next move. And so and then the second character is Alan, who is that's Monica, and Alan is a young guy from Antananarivo, the capital of Madagascar, who has kind of screwed up his life at home a little bit by having an affair with his child's teacher, his young kid's teacher, and ends up joining the French Foreign Legion. Um, and as a result, is stationed on a little tiny island in the Indian Ocean, um, near the Chagos Archipelago, which is the title, near the Chagos Archipelago, which is a place that most people don't know, and we don't know it in part because there's no tourism there, and there's no tourism there because the main island, Diego Garcia, is a an American military base
Mm.
and highly secretive. You need the high security clearance to get in to be allowed to land. Um, and uh, and so nobody's really ever seen it. We've never seen footage of it on the television or anything else. And it's it's the base that we bomb mostly lately Syria and was where we bombed Iran from. It's where we bombed Iraq from. It is the major U.S. base in that part of the world. Um, and so he's on Alan's on a little island there, near there, and our third character is a woman named Sky, and we don't know who she is or what she's doing. She's clearly not what she's pretending to be, which is an anthropologist, an ethnographer who's writing about a oceanographic expedition, French-based oceanographic expedition that's doing a survey of the islands in the Indian Ocean. And she is so she's kind of we're introduced to her and we're introduced to the people in the expedition in that third chapter. And then in the fourth chapter, we meet up with Frank Baltimore again, who's the hero of Born Slippy, the first novel. And he has been kind of licking his wounds from that novel, but wakes up uh, having come down from the island of Socotra off the coast of Yemen and skirted widely into the ocean to get away from the Somali pirates, but has come down. Not he wasn't. They weren't chasing him. He was far out to sea so that he wouldn't run into any of them, and ended up in a little bay at the top of the island of Madagascar. And so we start to sense that, well, these people are all kind of getting close to each other. Probably they'll meet. And sure enough, in chapter 5, um, Monica and Frank meet and in Monica's chapter, and so and we go on from there, and eventually, of course, they all get into each other's orbits, and they all end up in the orbit of Dimitri, the villain from Born Slippy, and mayhem ensues.
Um, when I'm reading a thriller type book, I always wonder how the author keeps the tension going and keeps the mystery up. First of all, it's funny when my wife and I watch movies or TV shows or read books together, and there's a
Mhm.
mystery. She always figures it out immediately. Like it's like in the first like 10 pages, I feel like of the book or whatever. And I'm always like the most gullible person in the world. I'm always like, what's gonna happen next? Like so
Yeah.
it's like I'm always thinking about, man, if I wrote a mystery thriller or something that had, a revelations will come later, how would I keep that a mystery? Because I always have so much as a viewer. It's exciting as a viewer, but I'm always like, how would I even go about making this mysterious to somebody like that who always figures? How do you leave enough clues that people feel like they can guess, but they don't guess too soon? You know what I mean? It seems like kind of a dance to do,
It
in
is. It
storytelling.
is. It is a dance, and there are a couple things. One is, you do insert some red herrings. You do
Right, of course, you have to.
give some kind of possible readings that are, possible the ways it's going to unspool that you're suggesting it might unspool that way, knowing that it's not. Um, Partly, as I said, I don't know where it's going as I'm writing it. So that helps. And partly, I did a lot of literary theory when I was a scholar. Did a lot of narratology, as it's called, this kind of study of the ways narrative works. And one of the things that I was always fascinated with was this idea that that what they call hermeneutic suspense. This kind of the suspense of trying to figure out what's going to happen next, um, and and what things mean. So what does it mean that this person shows up? What does it mean that that person is doing this? What does it mean that what's going to happen with that couple or that couple? There's just a lot of mysteries that are in the same way that there are in life, right? It's like, well, I don't know if these two these friends of mine are going to stay married or not. I, it's looked like maybe no last time I was with them, but we have that mystery is like we're perfectly willing to hold that mystery as a mystery and have a sense of whether it's going to go A or B. But we don't really know, and we have a million of those things in our lives every day. And as a reader, some readers get very frustrated if they're left with too many puzzles.
Mhm.
Um, and they need to have a kind of, and so, one of the things that you can do is like set up a little mini mystery that you can solve in 5 or 10 pages later and give your reader a little like sense of, oh, okay, well okay, now what about this? So that I figured out X when what about Y? And so you can kind of feed your reader a problem and a solution, or a real long range problem in which the solution doesn't come till the end, and some mid range problems that have solutions along the way, right? So and I think that the difference between you know the most popular writers and the writers that we consider difficult, you know, James Joyce or Gertrude Stein, or the hard people, the hard reads. The difference is how much a reader is willing to put up with not knowing what's going on,
Mhm.
right? And then kind of further down the prestige ladder, right? Because at the top of the prestige ladder are these really, really difficult writers. And in the middle are the people that kind of I think of as like Elmore Leonard, or you know, or Carl Hyacin, or the great mystery writers, great Hammett and Chandler and those and that kind of writer. They have a really good sense of where the you know intelligent average reader, what their toleration for not knowing and for no and need to know how to manage that. And then a little bit further down the prestige ladder, you get people that for readers who are used to really good writing find too simple because you like, as you said, your wife can see the ending coming. We see the ending coming right from on page one. It's really hard to keep us engaged at that level of suspense
Hmm.
that we like from suspense filled writing.
Sure.
Right. So if it's too easy, if the questions are all the answers to the questions are all too obvious, then it's no fun for certain readers. But it's really fun for the readers who are, some of those writers who are writing at that low prestige level are the best-selling writers in the world, right?
Yeah,
So,
exactly.
right, and they know exactly how to write for their audience, because that audience has an appetite for, or ambiguity,
Hmm.
that's lower than the people who are ready to kind of have fun with Gertrude Stein or Finnegan's Wake.
Yeah.
Um, so and everybody kinds of finds their things, and for most of us, I think we all know how to have a bit of fun at all of the different levels of that. Um, all the different, let's just call them levels of ambiguity. Most of us can, can dip into the most ambiguous text and saying, "Oh, okay, well, that's fun. I'm not gonna try to read this entire book, Finnegan's Wake. That'd be crazy." But I'm gonna, but I get the fun of it. I
Yeah.
can see, I can see what he's doing. Yeah, that's kind of all right. I get it. That's fun. And then the stuff that's a step down, and I'm thinking of Henry James or you know I'm just blanking on some names right now, but the high literary folks that are really they're a bit of work, and they're not. And there are days in which I want to go there. I want to read that kind of stuff,
Hmm.
and I want to have that kind of readerly pleasure. And then there are days when I want the Carl Hyacin and Raymond Chandler kind of pleasure, and then there are days when I want to kind of have the James Patterson. I mean, that's a bad example because he's a genius at what he does too, and he knows how
Hmm.
to. But his ambiguities are of all of a certain type. They're all about plot and deception, people deceiving each other and that kind of thing. So, right, and high stakes, so that you're right, what you're engaged with it keeps you the mystery keeps you involved because the stakes are so high. So sometimes I want that. The difference between that and Raymond Chandler or Dashiell Hammett, I think, is that they are involved in other kinds of ambiguity as well.
Hmm.
And
Absolutely.
so and I think that what happened, I kept thinking, I have to figure out what kind of writer I want to be and exactly how I want to, you know, place myself in this world of literature, where I want to, what kind of thing I want to do. And it turns out, well, when I sit down to write, it comes out a certain way. It is what it is, and I can't write like Henry James. I'm never going to. I can't write like William Vollmann. I would love to write like I can't. I don't.
Hmm.
Um, I can't write like Ishiguro. I can't write like any number of people. I can write kind of the way I'm writing in these novels. I can write the way I'm writing in the scholarly work. I can write in a few different modes. But once I'm writing fiction, it comes out in a particular way, and I don't have any control of that.
Right.
And and when people sit down to write a bestseller, they're doomed, because they you can't do that. You
Right.
cannot do that. you have to just see what you've got in that realm of imagination and let it play out on the page.
Hmm.
Fix it up as best you can after the main inspiration happens, and then that's what it is.
Right.
And so, yeah, I think that I got way off the track of the question of suspense, but the kind of suspense that I end up writing is the kind that kind of engages me at a deep psychological personal level, and so that's
Right.
what it is. That's just what it is, and
Hmm.
I'm not gonna all of a sudden start writing Bridget Jones's Diary. I can't,
Sure.
I'm not just not right.
Yeah.
Much as I might like to.